Hello, everyone, and welcome. Great to see you all here in the Aspen Ideas Festival coming out for the arts. You know, as you know, and if you don't know, now you will know, the very basis of what brought people here was that confluence of thinking not only about philosophy and moral reasoning and issues of the day, but how they connected through culture, through artistic enterprise. And in fact, the arts have always had the most primary of places at the center of the great conversation here at the Aspen Institute. I was privileged to run the Aspen Institute Arts Program between 2011 and 2018, between my dance career at New York City Ballet and now being president of Juilliard since 2018. Thank you. And it's great to see so many good friends who supported the work of integrating the arts into so many different conversations in this room, rooms on this campus, rooms across America, and in rooms internationally. And this conversation today is a continuation of those thoughts, going in a very specific direction, breaking the confines of genre. Breaking the confines of genre. So that relates, again, across the board. This is an artistic conversation that's a metaphor for many other conversations we have around narrowness, around aperture, and around breadth of ambition. And we have some extraordinary artists with us today, each of them with a different story, a different genesis, and a path that is ever expansive, that reflects that idea of what genre is or isn't, actually. So with that preamble, I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank the Aspen Institute for continuing these conversations, and specifically the Harmon Eisner Artist in Residence program. I see Trent Stamp here, who represents Michael Eisner in that endeavor, and so many other people who value the role of the arts in this conversation. So let me start by introducing our wonderful panel. We've got Daimé Arocena, the great Afro-jazz Cuban singer, composer, band leader in general. I watched her working with some of our Juilliard kids out there earlier today, and we just to put that out there right away, after this, there's going to be a little mini concert out at Juilliard Station right after this, so from here we'll all migrate. To her left, we've got Teddy Abrams. Teddy is the Harmon Eisner Artist in Residence this year. Conductor, composer, pianist, curator, director, great thinker, deviser, and we're going to hear about how all those things go into one flow. And then Chris Bowers over here. Chris, I got to say, pride of Juilliard, right over there. Jazz pianist at Juilliard, undergrad and graduate, 2 degrees, all the while becoming a composer, becoming a great film composer, and then, in his latest incarnation, becoming a producer and director of documentaries, including The Last Repair Shop, which won the Oscar for a short documentary last year. So already we've broken all the genres, clearly, so let's just get into the conversation. I'll start with you, Daimé.
Oh my God.
Oh my God. So, born in Cuba,
Yes.
and clearly were musical from the very first moment, it seems to
Yes.
me. You breathe music.
That's the way it is in the island. I mean, yeah, we are Caribbean people, so we are surrounded by music because we are surrounded by the sea. We have musical information around us. It's not just the instrumental thing or anything. It's just the way we live, the way we walk down the street, the way we talk, the way we interact is already musical. So the difficulty in Cuba is not being a musician, actually, because most of us, we have already that in our blood. That's called also Africa.
Yes. I remember I got to dance there once, I told you this, and walking around Havana, it was literally just music was everywhere. And then also in the great theater there, the sense of belonging and how the arts belonged to the island and to the people was really palpable. Tell us about your first musical experiences there and what you thought music was and what you wanted it to be and what were you thinking about when you were little?
Well, it's really interesting because my parents, they decided to take me to a music school when I was 8 years old because the neighbors used to say, just take her somewhere.
Now, why was that?
I was singing all the time. Like, I will make my neighbors crazy. So music was already part of this is something important to explain. In Cuba, we study music as our career when we are 8 years old. We graduate when we are 19 years old. So it's a long development, and it's a Russian system. So they trained us in a way. I mean, I can compare that with sports. They believe the body, when the kid grows, has to change with the instrument already. So when I moved out of the island, I saw many people starting making music at the age of 18, 17, 16. And for me, that was like, whoa. Because in Cuba, at 10 years old, if you play violin, you are already doing Paganini, like for real. It's the way it is. So,
and that was the course basically you signed up for at 8. Was I'm going to be a career musician,
yes,
because that's the commitment.
Yes.
No fooling around. This is not enrichment. This is for real.
This is for real. And I have to say something, because Cuba has these many situations. Being a musician means hope for your family. It doesn't mean, I mean, I have met many people that their parents encourage them to study something else. They don't believe music is a real thing to do. So in my case, I feel that way of thinking about music is kind of unrespectful for me, as someone that has taken my whole life, and every single day music is my only reason of being in this earth. But in Cuba, when you are a child and you have talent for music, your parents, your family, they see the light. They see a way of making some way of living, some way of actually escaping the island. So you are lucky if you are a musician.
There's a lot of respect and aspiration in it, is what you're saying. All right, so we're going to come back, but these years between 8 and how far did you get to? 14, 15 in conservatory, or did you continue?
No, you go until 19.
You did it, all the way?
Yeah, all the way.
Okay. I don't know. We're going to go to Teddy now, and we're going to come back and see how this developed with the topic of the panel. So, Teddy, maybe you want to pick up your story. What was the foundation? What was the foundation that you grew from?
So I did not come from either a family or a town where there was music on every street corner. I came from Oakland, California, where there is a lot of great music, but not quite like Cuba. But I was obsessed with playing the piano and improvising when I was 4, and so I started taking lessons, but wasn't terribly driven. The moment that things changed for me was when I was 8 years old and picked up the clarinet. And I don't know how to explain this, but everybody in 3rd grade band got an instrument, and most people were squeaking and squawking, weeks in. And I don't know why, but I started just playing through the whole band book, and I'd finished it in a week, and I was obsessed. I don't come from a family that pushed me to play. It's not a musical family. I would just take the clarinet and practice for hours a day. And then shortly after that, my parents said, well, we maybe should take him to see a professional group of musicians, because I'd never experienced that. And this is sort of my origin story, but when I was 9 years old, I went to see the San Francisco Symphony in a free outdoor concert playing all Gershwin. And within the first 5 minutes of that concert, I said, I want to be a conductor. That's what I want to do for the rest of my life. And after the concert ended, I wrote the music director of the San Francisco Symphony a very long letter. Disturbingly long, except for the fact that I was 9. It was not put in the stalker pile. I just went all out. I asked for conducting lessons right then and there. You see somebody, you go right up to them. But I really took the initiative, and I never thought I'd hear back. And then a week later, I got a letter from Michael Tilson Thomas, who said, here is what you need to do if you want to be a conductor. And that single act of generosity, of extending himself, is the reason that I ended up doing that thing that I wanted to do when I was 9. And I try never to forget that. He did not have to write me back. He could have sent just a simple form letter of thanks so much. I'm so glad you like our music. But instead said, you can do this. And I try and remember that every day in my role now as a music director of an orchestra that serves a community of people that might have their lives changed. Maybe not in that way, but in some form. And so that's been kind of my guiding principle ever since that moment.
So interesting. I think what we're going to do is we're going to now go to Chris, but I'm just going to set the stage that I want to hear from each of you in a way about what changed, what you thought it was, and then what you realized it could be. You know, what the pathway might even be. But Chris, I know your story, but why don't you tell everybody, you know, how did it start for you?
Yeah, so my parents decided before I was born they wanted me to play piano. Hearing your story, I feel like they might have been Russian secretly, even though they were black. But they had this plan. I think my dad was also very inspired by, you know, Venus and Serena's dad and Tiger Woods' dad. Like, I think he thought if there's a plan and a structure, then you have the best chance of survival. Because like my parents barely finished high school, essentially. They didn't go to college. And I think they saw the piano as this tool that could give me access to a life that they couldn't afford, essentially, and put me in spaces that they couldn't afford to put me in. And so when I was 4, I started lessons. But for me, that origin story core memory is when I was around 8 or 9, my grandmother actually suggested that they put me in jazz lessons. I was starting to lose interest, and she thought that might be an interesting thing. And I remember learning how to improvise and immediately feeling like there was this vehicle to express myself and being excited about being able to have these ideas. And all of a sudden my ear got better, so I was able to learn songs from the radio. And I felt like an outcast in my school system, but I was able to, you know, show my friends that I could play a Tupac song, and they're like, oh, Chris is cool because he can play Tupac, essentially. So I feel like it became this bridge, and that's what made me stick with it. But I think maybe a big shift for me was around middle school. I started to have, just like any middle school kid, a lot of emotions that just weren't okay. Like, my parents were very much like, you can have emotions, but don't let us know about them. Like, please keep them to yourself. And you know, and I think also as a young black boy, that was something else that, you know, being sad or angry, there are these emotions that were kind of not accepted or dangerous or any of those things. And I remember being very angry and deciding to play piano from this angry headspace and just to see what would happen and to improvise from that headspace. And 30 minutes later, I wasn't as angry. And also at the same time, it was so amazing because I was actually angry at my parents. And I was in my house and I was saying something through the music that was so clear to me, where I was like, I know exactly what I'm saying, how I'm saying it, how I'm expressing myself, the ideas that I'm connecting with internally, and nobody knows what I'm saying because it's all through this instrument. And so that memory for me of having this secret communication with this instrument was the reason why at that point my dad didn't have to tell me to practice anymore, because then it became this coping mechanism for me. And that's also what led to film scoring, was because I mean, my parents, again, with their plans at like 11 or 12 years old, they were like, well, what are you going to do for the rest of your life? Like, what are you going to college for? And like, what are you going to do after that? And I, at that time, had started listening to scores and realizing that I could hear the music from Jurassic Park or the music from Star Wars and feel the exact same journey of the movie just listening to the music. And so the idea that there was this job where you had to translate emotions into music felt like something that spoke exactly to what I felt in this music. And so I told them when I was 12, I want to go to school for jazz piano, I want to tour as a jazz artist, and I want to find a way to get into film scoring.
Wow. So let's pick up right there with you, Chris. We'll ripple. We'll do this and come back. So that got you to Juilliard as an undergraduate jazz pianist, and you were already thinking past that to film.
Yeah. Like, once I got to Juilliard, I think the thing that excited me the most about it was the access to the classical department, because I was considering other schools, but I felt like that space, one, the jazz department was incredibly small. I mean, at that time it was 38 students, and they only had enough for 1 big band and 4 rhythm sections. And so, like, I was the only pianist that was in my class was like 3 kids, essentially. And because of that, you're immediately thrust into this environment where in my combo I had a second-year master's student and a senior and a junior, and you're put on the same level. And also knowing that there's only 3 other piano players, I knew my chance of studying with Kenny Barron or Eric Reed or, you know, whomever I wanted to study with was incredibly high compared to being at another school where I'm one of like 100 piano players. And so I chose it for that reason in terms of my jazz interest, but also knowing that I needed to find a space to be able to learn more about orchestration and classical composition and have students that I might be able to convince to play something for me if I bought them pizza, essentially. But I feel like that was the thing that made me so excited. I mean, I was in the jazz department, but I started taking ear training classes I didn't have to take because I wanted to do those things. I started, taking composition classes and had a composition private teacher. And then going into my master's, I wanted to switch to another school to study film scoring. And a part of the conversation with the jazz department that convinced me to stay was that they were aware of that desire to become a film composer, that they helped me basically craft a schedule where I could have as much compositional work as possible so that by the time I was done there, I felt like I had a bit more knowledge in that space.
Amazing. Were there any obstacles along the way? Because that sounds, that makes me very proud that they worked that system for you.
I think that I maybe learned from my parents to kind of ignore obstacles, I guess, or just keep going as if they don't exist. But I feel like, really it was just time. I mean, there were some times I had teachers that I have a memory of one of my teachers after one of our lessons telling me by becoming a film composer, you're failing the jazz community essentially because your skills as a jazz pianist are things that need to stay in that space. And so if you go off and do something else, you're going to let us down essentially. And so there were sometimes some of the jazz department that had a bit of conflict with the classical department, but I feel like I always felt an openness with a lot of the teachers I interact with, and especially the students. I think that's the thing that I really loved about Juilliard is that even if it was difficult because of our schedules and trying to find time to do everything, I feel like the students were so hungry for that we were constantly breaking down those barriers and hanging out with each other and sharing information with each other.
Yeah, that's great. Teddy, what does that resonate for you in when you hear stories about kind of going through school and then ending up at the end of a place that's the beginning of a place? Yeah. Talk a little bit about how it happened for you.
Well, I'm so interested because the subject of genre has now come up.
Yeah, we're here.
And this idea of what type of musician you're supposed to be, I think is a really challenging one, especially for musicians that just want to make the music that they're excited about or passionate about. And I struggle with this a lot because as a classical musician, I don't love that term, but I'll adopt it now for convenience sake. I don't believe that classical is a genre. I really firmly believe that classical music is more of a practice, and we've been told what type of music we're supposed to play over the years, and it's been stereotyped. The media and Hollywood have created this cartoonish image of classical music as something that's incredibly elite, which is in total opposition to its history as a music of the people, or at least in communion with the music of the people. And it has this kind of ridiculous relationship to the rest of music, which is driven largely by what people like and what's popular. And in classical music, it's the one genre where we can say, actually, it doesn't matter if you like this or not. It doesn't matter if anybody's going to come to our concert or not. If nobody shows up to the concert, we blame the audience. They were too stupid. That's why they didn't come. This is a terrible paradigm. I know I'm sort of answering your question by way of other things, but I was interested in just making music that I believed in or I was excited about. And I had a lot of people that put up guardrails and said, no, if you want to be serious about the clarinet or piano, you need to practice these etudes, these specific pieces for X hours a day, and forget improvising for a while. The problem is you can't just turn off that side of your creativity. And I'm lucky that when I went to school, okay, I did not go to Juilliard. I went to the Curtis Institute of Music, and you guys probably haven't heard of that one, but we're proud to. But anyway, we're like the Hogwarts. We're like, you can't find us.
It's all family.
Yeah, exactly. No. There's no football games that we play. We get clobbered, But anyway, I was lucky that I had a teacher there who wasn't supposed to be teaching these things, but this guy named Dr. Ford Lallerstedt was like the wizard of the top floor. They kind of banished him to the back of the school because he taught crazy ideas. And I remember day one, I was supposed to be learning advanced score reading, and he spent the entire 2-hour class talking about Brokeback Mountain and how that movie unlocked a well of sadness into which humanity has put all of its concerns, and art is the only mechanism that breaks that open and allows us to share. And I left that class thinking, oh, this is what I want to do. Turns out Dr. Lallerstedt said improvisation is the key towards speaking fluent musical language. And in fact is the generative force for all music. All music comes from an essentially improvised basis. And I thought, well, that's not what most people had told me before. And that's when I took it upon myself to start educating my kind of whole musical being. And that's why now I don't accept the term classical musician. I just want to be a musician that makes me feel good about the music that I play, and that has something for the public that uses the power of music to then connect the dots, which is what I think the language can do.
Yeah, I was waiting for that word. You said it just right there at the end, connect. That it actually has a connection, because there's an isolation factor in quote-unquote genre, in what you said about quote-unquote classical music and being, it doesn't matter whether the audience is there. And that lack of kind of respect for connection, essentially. The idea that the point of it is that something that you love lives with somebody else, that it actually goes somewhere. And that comes from a place of making it live, actually. There's a great motto at Juilliard from the Juilliard String Quartet to play old music like it's new and new music like it's old. That idea of respecting the new and taking the old and saying, how can this live? How is it new? What is the beginner's mind of this? And I heard all of that in there, and I also heard that idea that finding your people is essential. You know, I know, Chris, we've talked about that because there was the idea of the classical musicians, quote unquote, that you were going to be side by side, but also the dancers and the actors and all the things that, you know, New York had to offer in that way. And one other point I just want to make before we go on is that we've already heard evidence of the multiplicity of directions. I used to hear, you need your classical bass so that you can then go do the other things. That idea that, why couldn't I have come from ballroom dancing and become a ballet dancer? I know people who've done that. Why can't you, you know, grow up and you're like trying to figure out how to approximate Tupac, but your goal actually is John Williams plus, and you're going further? That these things are not directionally specific. That's another form of breaking those confines of genre, that there is a right way to enter the flow. Okay, Daime, so pick up the story. What happens? You're in the conservatory, it's dead serious, and what's going on?
Yes, but I was born in a house that we were 14 people in a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment. So I was surrounded by rumba every single day. Yeah, that's the way we are. So I was studying Stravinsky and Tchaikovsky at the school, but I was listening to rumba every single day at home. That's the reason why, for me, music is... I strongly believe that music is not a human creation. Genres are human creations for convenience. Music is not. Music is the way we connect and communicate with every single being, stars, the moon and the sea and the ocean and the trees and the earth. That's music. The information of music is coming from there. And now we humans, we believe we are better than that. We are stronger than that. We are bigger than nature. So we create genres to divide us, to put these people in this side and these people in a different side, to believe some of us are better than the others. And for me, it doesn't make any sense at all. Because for me, as a singer-songwriter, what I do is to sing the songs I write. So for many people, it's difficult to box me. They always want to put me in a box. And they say, oh, she sings rumba, jazz with neo soul, R&B, cha-cha-cha, bolero. And you, okay. And she's a choir conductor, so you can hear a little bit of choir stuff, and gospel, but not too gospel. And it's like, I just do the music I write. So, for example, talking about conveniences, I will get Grammy nominations for main categories, but not for genres categories, because they don't know where to put me, where to place me, which I believe is an statement. It's always a statement. It's the way I try to say to the world, we don't have to box music. It's just human ego, a game, playing the game. and trying to conceptualize something that is stronger than us. Me, because I'm also coming from the Yoruba tradition brought to the Caribbean, we believe that music is the way we send the messages to the gods, to the ancestors, and dancing is the way we receive the messages. So music is a superpower. It has the power of connection with people that you can see but you can feel. You can feel it in your body when you dance, when you move, when you sing. That's why sometimes you are, I don't know, in a concert and people are singing in a language that you don't understand and you cry or you dance. It doesn't matter. Music doesn't believe about culture and languages and genres and things like that. That's too simple for music. But here we are trying to explain again how classical and jazzy it is.
Can I point out one thing that I heard in all three of you in certain moments, is that genre can substitute for other things, but what is really important to remember to me is that that is not to say, I'm not going to accept the genre categorization, is not to say that the art making is not rigorous and has actual form in all of its ways across whatever you want to call it, whatever it is. And I think that's another trope, actually, to be exploded a little bit. Like that idea of saying, well, I don't really believe in genre, so, you know, I'm actually going to try to combine some things here that I've actually never heard before, is not to say that you're not going to play at the absolute highest level, that you're not going to actually take the discipline of what the work is and explode that. These are not things that matter. I mean, Teddy, I would love to hear you talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great point, because this leads to a lot of complications that the classical world, again, to use that term, has dealt with. You know, the relationship between classical music and the music of the people, or folk music in all of its forms, it has peaks and valleys. There are examples of great success, of Brahms integrating a little tune that he heard played on an Alp horn into a symphony, of Gershwin, who was authentic both in the jazz world and the classical world, being true to himself. And now I'm not going to list the specifics, but many other silly examples where there wasn't rigor behind somebody's interest in a genre that they didn't understand. And I think this is a challenge that a lot of classical musicians do still subscribe to, this notion that classical music has all of the technical answers. Like, all of the technical knowledge for how to execute and operate an instrument have been codified in classical music, and the written notation has been developed to such an extent that it can explain everything. But it really can't. Not if you think about the bigger world of musics that come from so many traditions where there are techniques on the instrument that may look very similar to classical instruments, but they are part of an oral tradition, traditions that can't be just absorbed immediately, which is what so much of classical music is about. It's about extreme efficiency. That's why when you go see the New York Philharmonic or the Louisville Orchestra or the Metropolitan Opera, these orchestras are playing on a couple rehearsals. They're pulling together Mahler symphonies and world premieres on 3 or 4 rehearsals. If it's an outdoor free concert, 1 rehearsal. They're playing music that the composers spent months or years of their lives trying to conceive, that when they were often premiered took weeks and weeks, if not months, to learn, now in the most efficient, condensed manner. And when you think about, say, a Kentucky genre like bluegrass, which is meant to be lived with, it's a genre that when you learn a tune, you're supposed to repeat the tune over and over. Your fingers can play all the notes. That's not the point, though. To get the style, to get the soul of it, is a very different approach that's more equivalent to the amount of time needed to learn, say, the Beethoven Violin Concerto, where you spend those hours and hours thinking about it and receiving it. And so I do think that if we're to be open to genre, we also have to be very deeply respectful of the practice that allows anybody to be truly excellent and brilliant. And only then is synthesis possible. It comes from rigor. It comes from respect. And in the case of jazz and most musics outside the classical world, it comes from listening, which is the only way to really learn.
It's interesting. Chris, you want to comment on any of that?
Yeah, definitely. I think that the learning aspect of it from the jazz space, there's so much transcription, and I remember spending so much time transcribing things by ear, because if you look at that written out, it doesn't have the same feeling at all as playing it along with the pianist or with whomever and trying to have the same feel as Oscar Peterson or the same feel as Bud Powell or same feel as, you know, Kenny Kirkland or Herbie Hancock. Like, each of those individuals, they might play the same 4 bars completely differently. And so needing to be able to listen to that and learn by listening, I think is so important. And for myself, I think I had a really huge moment where that concept opened up even further, because I understood that within the jazz context that, you know, I can't really play like Herbie when we're playing a Louis Armstrong piece, because that doesn't, or at least if I want to play that authentically to that time, because it's, you know, harmonies and things that people didn't play in that sect of jazz. But I remember shortly after school, I was going to play with a friend's indie rock band, and they sent the recordings, and from my jazz, you know, Juilliard jazz mindset, I was like, oh, I'll show up at rehearsal and they'll have sheet music for me and I can figure it out because it's indie rock, so that's easy and it'll be fine. And I remember showing up, and the other keyboard player had already learned all the sounds from the recording, had already dialed them into the keyboard. I had a keyboard I didn't even know how to use or how to get the sound, or I would find a sound, they'd be like, yeah, that's not really it. There's a little bit too much high end, and actually it's more of a square wave and not a sawtooth wave, and like all these things that showed me that there was this depth to this music that I thought was incredibly simple that I had to respect and learn and honor in that way. And similarly, there was a moment where for a film, I was asked to write like a little country song, and I again felt like, okay, well, I'll listen to a couple of songs and then be able to do my version of that for this thing that's going to be played in the background, and it won't matter. And coming from that background of needing to really study things and being obsessed with learning about things, I ended up in this rabbit hole where I was learning about like the Carter family and Johnny Cash and all these things, but recognizing that like, oh, actually some of these forms are not like 8-bar forms, and like some of it's kind of amorphous. Sometimes it changes, sometimes it's through composed. Like there's all this stuff that I did not understand about this space that on the surface felt simple, that a deeper look kind of showed this depth to it. So I think that across any genre, being able to study on that deep level feels like the only way to actually represent it in a way that shows that you have lived with it at least a little bit.
Yeah, you have to know it to break it in some ways. You have to actually, and that requires that comment about listening is so key. And I think that really relates to so much that we hear, you know, in these rooms during Ideas Festival and in so many other ways we're living with today, is having that ability to actually to listen enough to be fluent. And actually not just finish too soon, to say, oh, it's done, I got there, I got enough, it's enough. Actually, there's a much deeper aspiration. So as I mentioned, we're going to have a little music out there after this at 5:15. It's something we call Juilliard Station, I'll tell you about. But we also thought maybe we'd kind of just glancingly talk a little bit and show a little bit as we go. Chris, maybe I'll just look at you since you're so close to the piano. If you were to you know, audible that thought, what would you do? Just what you just said, that idea of breaking genre, but knowing the depth of it and being respectful at the same time. It's a big challenge. Sorry, you're first. Go, Juilliard.
Let's see.
So what was going on over there? What were you thinking? What was your cadence? What were you thinking?
I think starting off with just something that felt, a bit more stereotypically classical in terms of the harmonic movement and structure, and then starting to improvise on that and playing slightly bluesy, but also slightly, more modern jazzy, essentially, and then at some point finding my way into something that's a bit more like R&B-ish, neo soul, some gospel. But I think it's like, it's interesting with the genre thing, because I feel like it's this word that feels so not oppressive, but definitely something that like has been put, or we keep all saying, and put on us. But also at the same time, if somebody says, "Can you play this in a more classical way? Can you play this in a more R&B way, a more gospel way, a more jazz way, a more modern jazz, blues?" It helps navigate or orient a little bit in a way where I was thinking ironically about genre to just orient myself, but then within that, recognizing that there's freedom within those boundaries.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating kind of alternate thought, essentially, and it relates a little bit to dance, and I'll represent that. So I was a ballet dancer. It didn't mean I couldn't do other types of dancing, but I was focused, and there was an aperture in like learning the discipline of it and the technology. And that's something I started thinking about at Juilliard Dance, because Juilliard Dance was founded to have ballet next to modern dance, side by side. These dancers were doing ballet in the morning and Martha Graham in the afternoon and Jose Limon and Merce Cunningham and on and on and on, and then making the new in that context. And there have been times, certainly, when the young dancers, as young people do, say, "I don't want to do all that. I need this. I came for this." And often, it would be, to some degree, I think the ballet, fine, but I am actually going to be this type of dancer. I'm going to be a contemporary dancer. I don't need the ballet. But at a certain point, it starts to become apparent that it's a technology. And the ballet is actually an incredibly important element in the contemporary if you are not being reductive, actually. And that's what I heard in what you just described. And I think it's a beautiful kind of series of kind of flow, essentially, of respect, but also aspiration, that you can actually do something with these technologies.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's the thing that opened my mind to falling in love deeper with classical music, or what we're calling classical music, is the recognition of the line not being as distinct as I thought. Because I remember when I was younger, the only classical pieces I had heard or I was being taught to play were the things you come to expect, Mozart and Beethoven, Chopin, and all that. And when I was starting to get into film music and studying John Williams, then I discovered Ravel and Debussy, and then I was like, this is jazz. I don't know what people are saying in terms of this being classical. Like, these harmonies, I understand in a jazz way. And so that made me feel like it was okay for me to have this other relationship with harmony, because there was a space for that in the classical space, even though I thought that they were actually distinctly different.
It's beautiful. Daime, what do you think about all this? Do you want to endeavor something over there that kind of wraps up your feeling about it?
Yes, I'll do my best. I'm not a piano player. I'm a singer-songwriter. So I play piano to sing on my own way. But I wanted to say first that, and I was listening to you and what you were saying, guys. And as a classical trained musician too, one of the things that I really believe is that technique can give you tools to develop your ideas, but it doesn't tells you how to feel and how to transmit that. So, for example, when I started going to universities out of Cuba to do master classes and things like that, I remember many people like having the Cuban clave and the Afro-Cuban clave reading down, for example, 6/8. And it was always funny for me because they would write it 6/8, like pan, pan, pa, pan, 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 pa, pan, pan, pa, pa. And I was like, okay, that's the rhythm, but it doesn't feel that way. So it's not the same than when you do pam pa 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 pa. So it's complicated sometimes when you are so schematic and you have that type of training to unblock that way of just feeling the things, trying to move the music through your body. So if it is not perfect, it doesn't matter. If you don't hit the right note, it doesn't matter. What matters is what you feel, because what you feel is what you send to the people that is listening to you. So I try to combine those because, of course, after 11 years of studying classical music, it is in the back of my head. But I pray to my ancestors every single day to keep me being able to feel more than being focused on techniques that might give me a lot of information, but it's not the main information that we need as musicians. So I'm gonna try something, wait. I have to say, okay, this piano is not made for me. It's high. So this is supposed to be a Cuban song. So Cuban song is pam 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 pam, right? But I wanted to make it weird because this song is called El Ruso. So I wrote it for the Russian guy. He doesn't know how to dance. So I did it in 7/8. So pa 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 pa. So it's like. So it's still song, but it's difficult to dance. Mi mamá estudió el ruso allá por los años 70. Dice que aprendió y no recuerda ni sacar la cuenta. Pero la vida es el mejor testigo. Sabe que nadie ha aprendido a encontrar en ruso la respuesta. Por eso yo te digo sin disgusto, no me escribas más en ruso, que eso no se estudia allá en la escuela. Tú de ruso no sabes nada.
Wow. Okay, so I'm just gonna, before we get to Teddy, I want to say you may have noticed somebody was missing. There was another person who was supposed to be on this panel, and there was the usual kind of Aspen situation with travel. Please welcome Charles Yang, who's with us.
Come on, baby.
What's going on, man?
Baby. That was awesome. That was amazing. No, I'll take it.
No, sit right there. So Charles is a violinist, also Juilliard, but he has broken out of genre in 1,000 different ways, and we've all told little stories about, you know, the kind of formation, but then I don't think we ever heard the word rebellion, but a sense that there was more, that there was a possibility of more, and how these things actually fed each other, and we didn't have to get pinned into it. You want to give us just, I know we're short on time and all, but give us a thought.
I'm sorry I'm late. I'm pretty bummed that I missed this. That was amazing, first of all.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
But I've known Teddy and I've known Chris. I know Chris really well for a while, and Yeah, I think the idea of just being a violinist, especially a violinist that grew up in Texas, and a violinist that grew up in Texas whose mom was my first violin teacher, and an Asian violinist with an Asian mom that teaches you from Texas, it's a crazy thing. So I was rebellious, you know, like I was one of 5 Asians that didn't know anything. You know, all my friends didn't know anything about classical music, so they would show me Dark Side of the Moon was one of the first things I heard outside of my home. And I was like, whoa, what is this sound? What is this David Gilmour sound? I was obsessed with it. I tried to mimic that on the violin, and then Stevie Ray Vaughan, being from Texas, I was a big fan of the blues, and got really into that kind of Texas blues. And it just all, and then I joined choir because I had a couple of crushes on some girls in choir, and I fell in love with singing. And I just realized I smell like the Delta Lounge right now. It's terrible. But yeah, that was my kind of upbringing in Texas, and then it all seemed to be weird already. You know, with my friends, it was weird that I played violin. With my Aspen, I used to come here every summer in Aspen here, and I would busk down by Paradise Bakery and just play Michael Jackson tunes on the violin, and that was weird to my friends here at the festival. Do you remember this? I remember Teddy from Aspen, and I just didn't know how weird I was, but it also was kind of great because I didn't think of it as different things. And then going to Juilliard, meeting other weirdos like me that also thought differently and just loved to combine different art forms. I remember walking in on Chris. We shared we were at the same floor of the dorms, same floor, right? And I caught you in one of the practice rooms practicing Beethoven or Bach, I forgot. And yeah, Bach. And Chris is an incredible jazz pianist, and I just heard a beautiful Bach from the practice room, and I look in and it's Chris Bowers, and I just thought there was a classical side and there's a jazz side, and then there's like sometimes it mixed, but you were honing your skills with, you know, Bach and the harmony of Bach and how to play it, your classical chops, and that was really inspiring to me, and so many different people from school have continued to inspire me, including you guys on stage right now, so.
Well, we're glad you made it to share a little bit.
Thank you. I just vomited out of my mouth.
That was
coming in here. Yeah.
That was perfect.
Vomited words.
Teddy, you want to pick up where we left off? Do you want to give us a little demonstration of something that you think kind of represents how you feel about this topic?
All right. Okay. After those two, this is becoming a taller and taller order here. All right. Let's see. Well, I'll just do something improvisational because I espouse those values. Okay. I'm not going to sing, for sure.
Come on.
There'll be nobody left when I turn around.
What?
Well, as Jaime had said something from nature, and I was thinking, well, we have the aspen leaves, and that was just a little sense.
You know, it's such an incredible opportunity just to see what can happen. And watching each of them watch each other and listen, you can just see what can happen. That mix is the thing, that sense of next step, that it's not frozen, that there is next. I think it's incredibly inspiring, and it's what I think about, that the opportunity to turn this to kind of like where we go, in a way, through education, is to make sure that all those voices are in the mix, that you are also getting that chance. And that's about opportunity, and that's about the fact that talent is always greater than that opportunity, and to fight for that moment, to have that sense that you can be in a dormitory and walk out and say, who's playing that Bach? It's Chris Bowers. What does that mean? And how it can affect you, and years later you're sitting on a stage in Aspen talking about it. It's kind of an amazing thing. I don't know if you want to play. Do you want to wait and play out there? Do you want to demonstrate something?
I don't know.
Something?
Do we have time?
Yeah. You know.
I kind
A
of don't
little
want to
ditty.
follow that. I mean,
You want to hear this.
So as
You want to hear this.
no,
as he gets his fiddle out, we'll just say, you know, that the chance actually is so, you know, this is a metaphor again. To be around ideas, to be around possibilities for different level of thinking, to build, to have a foundation that you build from, and to not prejudge it. It's what Yo-Yo Ma calls that beginner's mind, that sense that you approach everything with that sense of possibility, that there's something more. I think that's at the root of what we're talking about. And it does not, again, as you can see, take away from the sense of purpose around the rigor of what's being done. It's actually the opposite.
yeah. Maybe this will pick it up. Yeah. Wow, I am totally not warmed up, and didn't expect to play. But this is I don't know what to play. But I was inspired by your 7/8 thing, and I do have a piece actually that kind of made it into Chris's concerto. Chris wrote a beautiful concerto that I got to premiere, and I'm actually playing in Vail in 2 days. So this kind of worked out perfectly. But this was one of the things that when we were getting together, it's like, what do you like to do on the violin? And this kind of technique crept up on me. I was just home on my couch, and I was just lounging, and suddenly I plucked and played at the same time, and it sounded like. Which is a technique that I've never done before in any classical repertoire. So I kind of built a little piece on it. I won't play the whole thing, but it's called Loopy. The piece goes on, but I am not warmed up. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Man.
Thank you.
So many things to say about that. First of all, wow. Second of all, he chose to say yes. That is a huge part of it, of not limiting yourself to genre, limiting yourself to something. We all have so many people in common. I look at you and I actually think about Buck, think about little Buck, and work that, that idea of how we can extend ourselves over and over again through the instrument, through that instrument, over and over again. I want to thank each of you, especially Charles, for just making it, first of all, and then bringing it on home. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for all for joining us.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.